Welcome to Scuderia F1, the podcast that's always up to speed with the latest Formula One news. Follow us on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher. Now, here are your hosts, Mark Dailey and Kevin Laramée.
Good day, good night, Welcome to Scuderia F1 podcast, a podcast that is always up to speed with Formula One. Mark Dailey on the line as well. Brand new studio. If you are listening to us live on YouTube or even not live, even after, we got ourselves some new digs, some new looks, and you can see Mark on the television. Mark, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Kevin. Brand new season, brand new toys, brand new studio, brand new cars, brand new everything. It's a great time of year.
The only thing that wasn't new is we still got Sebastian Vettel winning the Australian Grand Prix, which was a bit of a deja vu from 2017.
Indeed.
Lucky is the word I would use. Very, very lucky is how I would describe this victory by Sebastian Vettel, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think anybody expected that. And when it was unfolding, it was a little bit unfortunate because those of us up here in Canada do get the Sky Sports feed via TSN.
Oh, don't get me started.
Just at that point, they were just kind of zooming in and out. They kind of do this picture-in-picture thing whenever they go to the commercials. And I don't blame them for doing it, but the timing was a little bit unfortunate, and it just kind of, came back right at the right time, and it was like, will he, won't he? And he just snuck out of the pits about 2 or 3 car lengths in front of Lewis Hamilton?
Yeah, well, this all started with the two with the rear left mechanician, this guy, mechanic, there we go. I'll get my pronunciation right. The mechanic that could not tell the other people that it wasn't working in time, and outside of 2 laps, Haas is no more, and that was terrible because they were both in the top 10. But this gave Ferrari such an opportunity. And, it was kind of weird because it wasn't the picture-in-picture. And that picture-in-picture lasted about 3 minutes. The 2 Haas cars had time to break down in the same picture-in-picture from TSN. I was so mad. I wanted to throw things on my TV.
Well, I think so, too. Excuse me. I mean, you look at just the progression of Haas Grand Prix over the past 2 years. 2016, obviously a brand new team, brand new setup, basically. And I mean, they started out, they had some very good races the first several Grand Prix, and then they kind of regressed or maybe leveled out, maybe not regressed, but they kind of leveled out to where you'd expect a brand new Formula One team. And then last year, they didn't really get past that sort of plateau that they set in 2016. So when they came out, and it was obvious that they were pretty much the best of the rest. I mean, they definitely seemed to be on par with the Red Bulls, and they weren't really all that far behind the Ferraris either. I mean, you look at the time of Sebastian Vettel, who was 3rd on the grid. He set a 121.838. Max Verstappen set a 121.879. And, well, he's Kevin Magnussen was a little bit further back. I was switching my times around. He was actually at 123.187. So, I mean, there was obviously a bit of a gap there between Max Verstappen and Kevin Magnussen, but nonetheless, very impressive. And then his teammate Romain Grosjean to round out row 3 in 6th position. And, I mean, he was only about 0.2 of a second behind his teammate. And, I mean, they were flying pretty good there in the opening stages of the race. But what a bizarre sequence of events. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that. First of all, you had the left rear tire. Magnussen's car didn't get fitted properly. He drove off, and the mechanic there waving his arms not to release the car, but they did anyways. And then a couple of laps later, I don't even think Magnussen had made it back to the pits yet on the back of the scooter.
I think it was still the scooter, yeah. And the mechanic was in the same sequence. You see the mechanic go into the private room and slam the door. Like, oh, something's not right here. Then you see a few turns later, Magnussen pulling off on the side. Be like, yeah, seems to be some damage on the left rear wing, left rear wheel, the suspension. And Magnussen was like, it just says suspension damage. That's what would the sensor show up. If a bolt is not screwed in correctly to fix the wheel, it does give a suspension failure alarm to the driver and to people on pit lane because that's what it does. If it's not screwed properly, automatically it'll break the suspension about just a few hundred meters. And that's exactly what happened. So Magnussen saying, oh, it's just suspension failure, led to the mechanics maybe not double checking the line quick enough. And the same that thing happened to Grosjean just 2 laps later.
Yeah, absolutely amazing, because this time it was the left front, and the same thing. The gunman on that left front wheel waving his arms frantically for them to not release the car. The car goes out, and you just almost had a feeling that one was going to end the same way. And again, he made it not very much further down the track, and then just parked it in a very awkward position. And just the pictures on the television, you see Gunther Steiner in the pits with his head in his hands, and the body language of poor Romain Grosjean, same thing when he got out. I mean, they were both besides themselves, and it was so disappointing to see. And what is interesting, I mean, Steiner is basically chalking both of these incidents up to human error, because apparently the hardware, the wheel nuts, the wheel guns, all that is the same, basically the same equipment that they've been using for the past couple of years. However, they just haven't put in the man hours, I guess, for practicing, and that blows my mind.
I was gonna say, is that my hypothesis too? Like, is it just a lack of practice? Is it a new crew together? I don't know. We would have to do some research, and it's not necessarily easy information to find. Is it the same crew that last year for Haas in the pits? If so, yeah, I'm not 100% sure either, Kevin, but I know that Steiner just did say that they hadn't put in enough hours practicing. So if they admit that, it means that it's even worse than that. We all know how F1 team talks and how they actually always lower the actual problem itself. They never truly tell you everything, right? So it means they barely practice pit, because those were the 2 first pit stops of the entire season for Haas. At least competitively. Yep. So maybe they truly didn't practice enough in the off-season pitting.
Well, I mean, it really is, I mean, just the thinnest of margins, because, I mean, the stops themselves were actually fairly quick and competitive to get them out. I mean, still, I mean, if you get 75% of the wheels on properly, that's obviously not good enough, because that 4th wheel was the problem on both cars. And it really is such a fine margin. For them to get those wheel nuts on and get them on properly and not cross-thread them. And I mean, I don't know what the odds are for it to happen twice in one race, let alone twice to the same team, but it's absolutely mind-boggling. And I don't know what they can really do to rectify it, because, I mean, we're in the season now. I mean, we have a week off here over the Easter season, or the Easter long weekend, and then it's off to Bahrain in about 10 days from now. So how much time are they really going to be able to practice between now and then? That's a very good question, but very disappointing, because as we were both saying just now, I mean, the car looks good. The car looks like it's handling good. I mean, they obviously have speed with that Ferrari engine. And I mean, and we can start talking about this too in a moment here, just there's been, at least in the first race of the season, and obviously it's a very small sample size, but just the reshuffling of the order. Yeah. And you see that Renault also seems to have progressed a little bit forward. Haas obviously seems to have progressed a little bit forward. McLaren has made an incremental move forward. I think that they
a crazy step forward for McLaren, but we'll talk about that for sure, because I have a lot of good things to say about McLaren, both on the color scheme and on the performance. One thing that I wanted to mention is with that Haas situation, the system that gives the green light or red light to the guy who's holding the trolley for the car. I know it's not the right term. I know it's not a trolley, but you all understand what I mean. That system is all automatic. When the nut is almost locked in, when all 4s and the car is ready to go, there's a green light or a red light that lights up in the guy's helmet, and he lets it go. It's so automatic that even if you have the green light in your helmet, it's hard to, if you have a guy in front of you waving, telling you, no, don't go, like this was the case twice for Haas. You're so drilled to do things automatically once that green light hit. It's almost waiting for, it's like a reaction test. You know those reaction tests that you test your reaction time with lights that you hit on a wall? You're getting ready for that light, and as soon as you see the slimmer hint of light coming from that source, you hit the damn thing. It's a bit the same thing here. You're so drilled to activate your muscle as soon as that green light goes in your your helmet, that it just goes automatically. You don't really even have time to check if everything's okay. The light goes green, down goes the car, and he's off. And I think that's what happened twice there too.
Yeah, and that's what it is, Kevin. It absolutely comes down to the training and just reactions. Everybody does their bit and they move on, and you have a very small window in which you're working in between 2 and 3 seconds. And if even one of those guys around the car is off by a fraction of a second, it all goes wrong. And unfortunately, that was the case for Haas. But I think it just goes to show you, just in general, just how amazing Formula One is, and the whole pit stop phenomena. I mean, it really is a phenomenon when you look at it. When you have 20 guys around the cars and they're able to get the car, get both jacks underneath the front and the back, and have all 4 tires taken off, 4 new tires put on, put the wheel nuts on, and that car basically is rolling almost in the same instant that it comes to a full stop. I mean, it is absolutely one of the most impressive things in any sport that you can see anywhere. And, just to maybe finally underline how unfortunate that this was for Haas and for the fans. Well, I guess everybody, except for the fans of Ferrari and Sebastian Vettel, but just to add a little bit of injury to Haas is that they were also fined 10,000 euros for a double unsafe release of both of their cars, which, I mean, if you're going by the letter of the law, that's exactly what happened, even though you didn't have tires bouncing down the track there at Albert Park, but that basically was what it was.
Yeah, no, it's a double whammy for Haas. On top of having 2 cars in the top 10, on your way to collecting points, on your way to collecting money from sponsors, and all the investment and the improved partnership with Ferrari and their clients' teams. If we remember to late last year, when it was announced that Sauber will be still having the Ferrari engine, it was announced too that Ferrari will be more open to work with the drivetrain and gearboxes and other parts of the Ferrari driveshaft system with other teams, Alfa Romeo, Sauber, and Haas, those 2 biggest recipient of their help, all the only ones. And truly, this has been seen. Yes, the chassis of the Sauber is garbage, so that's why the car is not that fast. Let's be clear here. But when you have a decent chassis like Haas that does have more resources than a team like Sauber, that does have its own wind tunnel and a lot of engineers working in different racing, but a lot of experience as a whole as a racing company, you see the benefit of that with the power and the better relationship with Ferrari having results. It's too bad that the both cars did not finish further than the 25th lap. But
well, considering only 5 cars didn't finish the Australian Grand Prix, and both of your cars are 2 of them, that's really not a very great way to start the season.
No, it's not, but you do see the results still in the pace and the qualifying and the pace in the first 23, 25 laps, depending of Grosjean or Magnussen. You do see the results of that better partnership with Ferrari when it goes to the drivetrain aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. So where should we go now,
well,
Kevin?
We barely talked about Vettel.
Plenty of things to talk about. Sebastian Vettel? Yes, let's talk about Sebastian Vettel. Where do you want to start?
We were talking about how it happened, and we went on a tangent on the Haas, but the Haas thing created the perfect storm for Sebastian Vettel to take over the race lead. Sebastian Vettel under virtual safety car, because after Grosjean pulled on the side of the racetrack, virtual safety car was called, and with that virtual safety car, everyone at the track is kept at same distance and rolls at the same kind of pace. But not in the pit lane. You can go faster in the pit lane, so it's almost a free pit stop. And lo and behold, it's 15-second gain. When you have a virtual safety car and you go into the pit, you gain 50 seconds on the guy running in front of you in Australia in the pit lane, because the limitation of the pit lane is higher in the speed than the limitation on the track when it's under VSC, so you gain about 15 seconds at Albert Park. The software of Mercedes was saying, you got 15 seconds, you're good. But they had 11.5 seconds actually. On Vettel, the software made a mistake, and Vettel pitted, gained 15 seconds, and finished in front of Hamilton.
Yeah, Yeah, amazing. I mean, we were just talking just now about the openness and frankness of Gunther Steiner to admit human error and just the fact that they're not polished enough on their pit stops as the problem for both of their cars. Then you turn around and you look at the team in Formula One. I mean, Mercedes obviously has been the team to beat the past 3 or 4 seasons. For them to admit that it was a software flaw that caused that was obviously quite an embarrassing moment, because I mean, Lewis was in control of that Grand Prix. I mean, he wasn't miles and miles down the track, but he was in front of Kimi Räikkönen going into that first round of pit stops by what it was, about 3.5 seconds or something. I mean, comfortably in front. He wasn't being pushed. I think he was just going just as fast as he needed to. And then to have it all switched around underneath that virtual safety car, and then ultimately the safety car period there, was absolutely amazing. And again, I mean, Lewis just wasn't able to put a move on Sebastian Vettel, even though he was quite keen to do so. But the other thing I thought that really stood out for me in the moment was when Lewis said over race radio, "Like, hey guys, how come you didn't tell me that Vettel was going to pit?"
What's going on, guys? What's going on? Did I make a mistake? What's happening?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he must have been absolutely flabbergasted when he was going down the pit straight, and then all of a sudden he saw Vettel emerge from the pit lane in front of him. I mean, obviously with the virtual safety car deployed or engaged or whatever you want to call it, because there obviously isn't a real safety car on the track at that point, but when it is a virtual safety car period, there's only a maximum amount of speed that you can go. So it wasn't like he could put the hammer down and try and just get that little bit of distance. So I mean, I guess he would have at least liked to have known what was going on. And not the greatest way to open the season for Lewis Hamilton. But you know, I was thinking afterwards that perhaps just in the broader picture, if you're just maybe not a fan of Vettel or Hamilton, that perhaps that it just maybe just turns things on its head a little bit, because I think if Hamilton wins that race, then right from the beginning it's like, oh, here we go again, another season of Mercedes dominance. So at least from that point of view, it's made things interesting, and it's going to be really fascinating to watch how the teams react, because I mean, Vettel was pretty frank. I mean, when have we seen this much honesty in Formula One? I mean, another guy that basically put it all out there after the race was Sebastian Vettel, who flat out said, we didn't really deserve to win this race. Where the car isn't quite there yet. We're still learning some things about it. We still have some things to sort out, and we're not quite as good as the Mercedes. And I was just all these open and honest comments from guys all over the place is just something I'm not used to. I mean, it's refreshing, it's great, but it definitely set up a very interesting scenario going into Bahrain in 2 weeks.
No, it did. And let's not forget, all this would not have been possible if Kimi Räikkönen would not have pitted first of the two Ferraris. So the amount of things needed to happen correctly for this to happen, to unfold, it's impossible to have predicted this if you're Ferrari. It's impossible to have predicted this if you're Mercedes. So it's just a perfect storm, again, and it happened, and Ferrari were able to take advantage of it. And the decision by Ferrari to pit Kimi Räikkönen, giving the perception of favorable treatment, picketing him first, but giving the outside chance for Vettel to maybe catch Hamilton on that instance. And what Nico Rosberg mentioned on Sky Sports after the race, saying, look, Kimi Räikkönen had no chance of catching Lewis Hamilton anyways in weird circumstances. So why not just be the conservative way? You pit him first, you give him faster tires, and go see what you can do. And then you have the outside chance with Vettel that you might be able to finagle something if there's circumstances that happened, which they did, and it did pay off. It takes a lot of confidence in your decision-making abilities to do those two in a race live, and both kind of panned out.
Yeah, and as that was all unfolding and Kimi was in second place there, I kept thinking back to Monaco last year when they famously pitted Vettel. They gave him the preferential pit stop and pitted him first, and obviously launched him into the lead and ultimately won him that Grand Prix. And I kept thinking to myself, if it was any other team and it was any other drivers, then you could probably say or see that they wouldn't do it a second time. But until Raikkonen actually went in first, it was still nagging at me, because if any team would go down that road a second time, it would be Ferrari, right? But it definitely worked out in their favor, definitely not in Kimi's favor. But it was disappointing. I thought that once he switched onto the soft tires, he just was not competitive. Vettel obviously had a little bit more pace, but Kimi was just kind of floating around there in third place, and obviously Ricciardo caught up to him in the later stages, but he obviously couldn't find a way around him. So, I mean, a first and a third, a double podium for the Ferraris, a great way for them to start the season. But still, I mean, I've said it about 5 or 6 times already. It's still such a bizarre situation. I can't really quite get my head around it. But what about now the other obvious omission from that podium, or perhaps that top four, and that would be
Bottas.
Lewis Hamilton's teammate. Yeah, Valtteri Bottas had a big shot.
I didn't see him. I saw him on Saturday during the qualifying, and then I saw him in the wall. I didn't really see him since, Mark. It was kind of hard to see him in the race.
Yeah, well, I mean, he started all the way down in 15th position, and even in the opening stages of the Grand Prix, he didn't really move up. And we should just mention right now is that during the entire Grand Prix, there was only 5 overtaking maneuvers, prompting a whole bunch of things to be said. And just recently, just today, Ross Brawn, obviously the sporting director for the Formula One management, the Liberty Media's, I guess, the practical arm of Liberty Media's conglomerate, or whatever you want to call it. So he said that they must make a proper and concentrated effort to solve the overtaking problem, because that was quite disappointing. I mean, obviously Melbourne is not a track that we see a lot of overtaking to begin with, but even for a track like that, I thought there was a real noticeable lack of overtaking. I mean, there were plenty of guys sliding off the track, and a lot of guys trying to make some looks here or there, but nobody really got close enough to even really try and make a move. Even Max Verstappen, I mean, a guy that is found, he finds places to pass almost anywhere, and any time was not able to make his way up through the field. I mean, he was complaining of oversteer right from the beginning, and he spun out very un-Max-like into turn 1 there, and he was lucky too. I mean, he basically did a 360, went onto the grass and kept going, and wasn't collected by anyone, but he lost several spots before he got the car pointed the right direction down the track again.
No, it was interesting too, because there was some overtaking at the beginning of the race, like after the start, and the commentator was like, "Oh, we're already seeing more overtaking in this race than in last year's race." They didn't know at that time that was the last overtake of the entire race that they just talked about. But you mentioned Bottas, and I'll come back to the lack of overtaking in a second. But I wanted to mention Bottas' absence from the battle up front cost the Mercs as well, because Hamilton was quote unquote isolated. Ferrari had more strategy available to them. And the fact that Bottas was not there to maybe slow down a Ferrari, if he would have been in second or third place compared to a Ferrari, it would have been useful at that point. And that's a shame that Bottas, because of his stubbornness to trying to do a fast lap in Q3, when he could have just... You missed it. You missed that turn. Don't try to overcorrect and keep it down and be stubborn about it. You missed it. You missed the apex. Protect the car. Do another run at the turn. You had time. There was like 7 minutes left in the session or something. 12 minutes left in the session. So it was a big mistake during qualifying by Bottas. And in my mind, it might not have been technically the case, but I think it cost the Mercs the win on Sunday.
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, they're obviously used to having 2 cars right up the front there. And I mean, that really gives them a lot of flexibility with how they conduct their strategy throughout the race. But they were really, for lack of a better term, stuck between a Ferrari sandwich. And well, I mean, it wasn't like Lewis was really fending off Kimi Räikkönen, but definitely they didn't have any other options for Bottas to maybe try and throw himself into the mix there and really help the team out. So that was very, very tricky for Mercedes. And I mean, they have always had cars up at the front there. I mean, this is one of the rare occurrences that they haven't. And I think this is really going to be a make or break year. Well, maybe a make or break couple of months for Valtteri Bottas and his career at Mercedes, because I mean, in 2017, I think he did a very good job to come back and come back to Mercedes for 2018. But I think he's got to deliver more this year than he did last year. I think that perhaps Mercedes don't want to get in another sort of Hamilton-Rosberg situation that they had for a couple of years there. And I mean, it was pretty tense and pretty nasty and pretty toxic a lot of times. I mean, where it came to the point that they said, well, you know, if you boys don't behave, you know, one of you steps out of line and costs us a race or a championship or whatever, we're going to terminate your contract and throw you out. I mean, the hate between the two was real. The competition between the two was real. And I think that they really pushed each other. I mean, probably Lewis pushed Rosberg more. I think it motivated him more rather than the other way around, considering that, you know, head to head, obviously Hamilton is a better driver, faster driver than Nico Rosberg. And I think Nico's probably better than most on the grid, or at least during the years that he was racing. And so, I mean, they won three world championships, three world championships when they were partnered up there, and three constructors world championships. So that was great. But I mean, obviously, it was very difficult for the Mercedes management to handle. And I mean, Bottas doesn't have that kind of personality. I mean, he's kind of a more laid back kind of guy. Finished. I mean, Hamilton says what a great teammate he is, but I think he's got to step it up, though. I think he really needs to be like the ultimate team guy. I think that if he's not pushing for the world championship himself, is that he's a solid number two, and that if Lewis is the guy that is in the lead of the world championship, that the next name behind there is Valtteri Bottas. So I think he's got his work cut out for him. I really do.
Bottas, for Merckx to be successful this year, will need to be what I call the buffer. He will need to be buffer Bottas. He needs to get ready to rumble. He will be the buffer between Hamilton and the rest. When that happens, Hamilton's long gone. Nobody will ever pick him up. And then you make the buffer work for you. All right, Valtteri, slow down a bit. Pack him up real tight behind you. Lewis has gone in front.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I saw that you made quite a big statement.
Well, that's my bold prediction, and then I was going to come and
bold
mention
prediction,
it.
Yeah.
You mentioned it was going to be a difficult few months for Bottas. You didn't say a year, because in my mind, he's going to fail. He's going to have difficulty. Why? Because it's between the ears. I don't think he's strong enough. Nothing to do with the guy itself. The pressure's mounting. And the reason behind his crash on Saturday is him not facing up that pressure. Because at that corner, when he knew the times he made before were not that great, and he was already in trouble in qualifying, he pushed it too hard at the wrong time. There's 20 F1 driver in the entire world. You are not allowed to do that kind of mistake. Not that
especially if you're driving a Mercedes.
Especially if you're driving the best car out of the 20. Well, the 10 different cars. So that was unacceptable if you're Toto Wolff. Remember how he still slammed he did the famous Toto Wolff slam. He's careful, though, because he broke his hand in the offseason, so he can't slam as hard. But he did slam it. And that mistake by Bottas made me think at that exact moment. And I cannot shake that feeling since then. Yep, he's not finishing the season there. There's Verline that's still there. He's a reserve driver for Merckx. That doesn't have a drive this year, but he's a reserve, and he has experience. Could he do better than Bottas? I don't know. I quite think that Verline did not help his career over the last 2 years by driving a not good car, not making it good, not even making it better. Like, just driving around a garbage can does not necessarily make you a more valuable driver to the eyes of your bosses. But for me, if it's not Verline, there's a guy called Robert Kubica, who's the only guy who ever made anything happen with this trash of Williams. I know I'm being quite hard on William, but when the 18-year-old driver tells you that your chassis is not good, What does he know? Exactly. So if he can decipher this, it's because it's truly terrible. And for Williams, when your entire goal is just to make a good chassis, because that's what you do, this is a big failure.
Yeah. And you made a bold prediction a little bit earlier. I'm going to make maybe not a bold prediction, but maybe a bold conspiracy theory. We all know that Toto Wolff and the Verstappens are good friends. And it seems that there were several times last year when the rumor mill kicked into overdrive when Toto Wolff was seen visiting the Verstappens in their motorhome or vice versa at a Grand Prix. And Lewis has been dropping hints. He did it again this winter that, maybe in the next year or 2 years that he's going to hang up his helmet and his driving gloves and call time on his Formula One career. And if you look at a guy whose name has been thrown out there a lot of times over the past couple of years as a potential world champion, and we've seen Max's quality, would that not be a natural kind of successor or a guy that you would want racing a Mercedes potentially when you have, for now, a 4-time world champion in Lewis Hamilton, who's still there, but maybe might not be next year or the year after when he finally decides, hey, guys, I've enjoyed my time in F1. I've won multiple world championships, and it's time for me to move on and do something different for my life. I mean, wouldn't that be like a great fit for Mercedes and Verstappen? So I'm just going to throw that out there based on nothing other than logic and maybe a bit of gut instinct.
I'm going to take this, and lights were going off in my mind when you were saying this. And here's just a few facts here, okay? I'm going to throw those facts at you, and then I'm going to tell you my hypothesis.
All right, let her rip.
Red Bull has a contract with Renault to be a client team until 2019. Danny Ricciardo's contract with Red Bull finishes this year. Christian Horner has been open, talking last year, about what potential engine they could have in the next few years, saying nothing's out of the question. Nothing is off the table. It could be Ferrari, it could be Merckx, it could be Aston Martin if they get their things in gear to make an engine for 2020, 2021. But they need this to happen for 2019. So for Red Bull and for Merckx, both needs things. If Lewis Hamilton wins number 5, he's retiring at the end of the season. Or maybe Bottas screws up one time too many this season, and we have a Carlos Sainz Part 2 type trade with Danny Ricciardo going to the Merckx for some money and Verline or something. Like they're going to go drive a Red Bull, and they're going to terminate his drive contract and just go to Red Bull and we're clear of you, which the Merckx will be happy about. But on top of it, Merckx will be, okay, we'll sign a contract to give you engines starting next year, and you can be good. But we'll keep this championship, and we're having Ricciardo to be the lead driver next year with Mercedes.
Yeah, wouldn't that be amazing? I mean, there are so many funny things that can happen in Formula One, and some people might kind of laugh and chuckle to hear that, but the caveat is to that is that just because you think it's outrageous and it might not happen in Formula One doesn't mean that it won't. I mean,
look at 2017, Mark. Look at the Renault, Sauber, and Toro Rosso Honda debacle across the board.
Exactly.
Who would have thought that one team would have stripped of their best assets and their engine, replaced by just spare parts, basically, at Toro Rosso, and Renault and Red Bull got better. So who knows?
Well, talking about that now, I mean, wasn't that a weird thing? I mean, poor Pierre Gasly didn't last very long before he had problems with his, and Brendan Hartley finished a lap down, the only car lapped at Albert Park, and he was 15th. Yeah. And those Toro Rossos didn't really look all that great, but I think the one guy that was relieved to see the Toro Rosso struggling was Fernando Alonso. I think that yeah, we are getting there.
And but just before we go to Toro Rosso, the F1 season truly has started when the first Honda engine of the season blows up. There we go. Season has started.
Yeah, it took only, about 15 laps or so, maybe not even that?
Barely. Yeah, anyways. Let's talk about Fernando Alonso before we start our livery critique, our fashion statement section of the Scuderia F1 podcast. Once a year, we look at all the cars. And this year, if you're listening to the audio version of the show and the podcast version, I suggest you transition to the video version, which is available on YouTube, youtube.com/Sports Podcast Network, on our Scuderia F1 Podcast page on Facebook, and as well on our YouTube page of Scuderia F1 Podcast. You can watch the live version or the video version, which will display the livery as well as talking about them, and we can look at them and see what we like and not. But Mark, let's finish with Fernando Alonso. Nando with his best result since 2016, and as many points for McLaren in one day than 2017 as a whole.
Well, I think that even though you might not be a McLaren fan or an Alonso fan, I think that maybe a lot of people, just fans of Formula One in general, maybe breathed a bit of a sigh of relief, maybe even just half a breath or sigh of relief, because I mean it was just so sad and so frustrating and just pathetic watching them struggle the past couple of seasons with the Honda engines. I mean, I keep thinking about at Sochi last year when poor old Fernando didn't even make it to the starting grid, and you hear him on the race radio arguing with the engineer, and his race engineer was, well, try flicking the switch another couple of times. He said, I've already tried that. Why don't you come out here and try that? Yeah. Just all the frustrating and sad moments. So I mean, it was great to see. It was great to see. I mean, I'll be fair though, Kevin. I wasn't overly impressed by them in qualifying. They didn't make the top 10 shootout. Yep. But I mean, in the race, I think that they played their cards well. I mean, obviously Fernando with a P5 and his teammate Stoffel van Dorn with a P9. I think that that's a very, very promising start to 2018 for McLaren.
There's a big disparity in the time of Alonso and Van Dorn too, so that just tells me the value of Van Dorn versus the value of an Alonso. But I agree with you. But there's one thing that I need to stress. McLaren hasn't truly tuned up or set up a car in a few years. They were just trying to survive, just trying to make the car work, just make it start, just make it hold together. So they're not used to setting up a car to try to get faster. So it's going to take a few races or a few weeks for those instincts to come back and then be like, oh yeah, that's how we do this. I forgot that's how you tuned up a car to make it faster.
Racing and winning is in McLaren's DNA. So definitely a big step in the right direction.
I think it's the orange, and I think we should start right there.
Yeah.
What did I say after Indianapolis last year? What did I say on this very show after the Indy 500? I say, Mark, you know, that McLaren car, orange and the blue letters and the blue, I think it's going to come back to F1. I think it's going to be what this Indy 500 venture would have been all about, is rediscovered that branding, quote unquote, an industry term, or rediscovered that identity and bring the identity back to Formula One. I guess I was onto something.
I guess you were. And I mean, Fernando's car at Indy last year looked absolutely amazing. I mean, it just looked sexy. I mean, when you think about the winning cars that McLaren have over the years, everybody remembers the Marlboro McLaren branding from the 1980s and the 1990s when they actually had successful Honda engines. You think about those silver arrows and the West cigarette branding, which is obviously a thing of the past. 15, 20 years ago, again with the Mercedes power, those were iconic cars. I mean, they're obviously very competitive. And they look great. And I think that over the past couple of years, I think they kind of got away from that. 2 years ago, I didn't have a problem with the all black McLaren. I actually thought it looked pretty cool. But last year when they kind of went that sort of like 50-50, it had a little bit of that McLaren orange on it, and then the black and that orange, or sorry, the white sort of stripe in between it to kind of separate the two colors. I thought that it didn't work. It just did not look right. But when you see it on the car this year and you just see it in all its glory, it's like, yeah, that works. And it looks like $1 million. And it looks like a McLaren should do. And I mean, it looks like a throwback to the 1970s, the 1960s, when they first started building their own cars. And it looks absolutely spectacular. I love it. Love it.
And those two colors, you might think, I'm not sure if they're going to work together. I'm not too sure. But they do in action. And on the car, they look great. At high speed, they look great. And we love the fact that there's no more shark fin this year. but there's a damn halo. And I think we need a moratorium, Mark. We cannot talk about the halo every show. It's here. It's going to stay. It's part of it. So we're going to have to deal with it. And I think there's no need to complain every show about it.
No, it was funny. I was thinking to myself, watching qualifying and practice in the race over this past weekend, that given the if I had to take one or the other, the shark fin or the halo, I think I go with the shark fin.
Yeah, I'll take the shark fin all day, all day.
In the week. But the funny thing was, Kevin, is that for all the hate and all the criticism, at times I didn't even notice the halo. I mean, it is only really apparent in certain angles.
Depends of the car too. Depends of the car and how they treat. And I think we'll include how you handle the halo in our critique segment. So the way McLaren handled the halo, it's a bit orange, but it mostly carbon fiber. It highlights it. I don't think it blends into the chassis of McLaren, the halo. So for the halo incorporation into the design of the car, I give like a C for McLaren. But for the livery itself, I give an A. Oh
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the livery in general. I think the orange body with the blue chandon on the wings, and also on the, I guess, the fin on the back of the airbox looks pretty good. I mean, they complement each other great. I think they look very good. I thought they maybe could have done something better, maybe a little bit more like the Ferrari or the Williams or the Force Indias, for example, that use their own colors on the halo. But in general, and we're critiquing how the car looks, that's a very minor issue. In general, I think it looks like $1 million.
Exactly. Let's move to another car that I think is very good looking, and that's the brand new Ferrari. How many times did I complain the last 2 years that Ferrari was not the right red? It wasn't red enough. It wasn't Ferrari enough. They brought the right Ferrari red back. Yeah, it's red. Hey. It's the right red. It looks good with the red halo and the logo on it. It looks sexy. I love the new Ferrari.
Yeah, absolutely. Same thing again. I mean, it looks wonderful. They got that proper Ferrari scarlet red and a little bit of the Italian tricolore on there as well. And it's interesting too. I think that what stands out for me is just the way that they've really blended in the advertising on the car. It looks more subtle than it has in past years. And to me, when I saw the Ferrari this weekend, it was more red rather than advertising. I mean, like the Shell, the UPS, the Ray-Ban advertising on the side of the car isn't really all that small compared to past years. But I think that the way that they've placed it and the way that they've done it is very smart, and it looks like a Ferrari. And hopefully it'll live up to the DNA that the Ferrari has, and lives up to the way that it looks.
And the Ferrari logo on the actual halo makes it look cool too. And I think that's something that is across the board too. The return of the actual name of the team on the car. Another thing that I've been talking. Did Liberty Media listen to us, Mark? Is Liberty Media listening to our podcast? Because every single advice we said last year kind of has come true. But because the Renault, written Renault in the back, and you have Haas, of course, but you have like logos of cars, and it's kind of slowly going back to this and less commercial, like a little bit less obvious at least. Let's go to quickly on the Mercs, because the Mercs, well, they're just the same as last year, outside of the new Tommy Hilfiger partnership at the front and a black halo. The Mercs look exactly the same.
Yeah, I mean, they don't really change the design or the aerodynamics on the cars all that much. I mean, they seem very much to be subtle evolutions from year to year to year. And the one thing is that when you look at the W09, the first thing you say is, yeah, that's a Mercedes. It looks right. It looks fast. And that looks like a winner. And like you say, just some very sort of slight changes to it. And obviously the biggest one, like you say, was the Tommy Hilfiger branding on there as well. But again, another lovely car that Mercedes has designed. And obviously what we've seen over the first race is that it looks like they've designed another winner, even though they didn't actually win the race.
Exactly. And the halo is black, but because of certain amount of black on the actual design of the car, it kind of blends in more. So I'll give him a B. This car surprised a lot of people a few weeks ago when it was unveiled. The Alfa Romeo Sauber we're far, far away from the terrible looking Saubers of the last few years. And no offense to Sauber, they had like 2 weeks notice to start the season. So it's not their fault a few years ago. But you can tell that the partnership and now the Alfa Romeo branding, which means an influx of money to Alfa Romeo Sauber, really shows, at least on the design scale and performance a bit. Leclerc was able to get a little bit something good at this car at some point. But you do see at least an improved chassis and an improved look. At least for the look-wise, the Alfa Romeo Sauber looks pretty good.
Yeah, it does. I like the color combinations. That sort of like that reddy brown maroon color that they have on the airbox with the Alfa Romeo logo, and that really nice white color. It works. And it was funny when we were looking at the new cars as they were released over the winter, and when we saw the Saubers in the new livery, my wife and I, we kind of looked at each other. Was like, geez, I mean, you look at the Sauber from last year, it's about 180 degree change from the blue and gold that they had last year, their 25th anniversary. But I think that this is a big improvement on it. So obviously, the car itself has a lot of work that needs to be done to it, but it looks good.
Like it should be good, right? That's what you wanted the car. It looked like, if it was at the front with the color scheme white and red, it would not seem out of place because we're used to seeing white or red cars at the front. So I think that's in the mind. One of the most disappointed liveries, and that's been the case for me for the last few years, is Red Bull. Why matte black again? I don't know. Same thing coming back. Pretty much the exact same design as last year. The only difference is Aston Martin on the back wing, very, very big on the DRS, and you see the Aston Martin logo there. But it's pretty much the exact same design as the past few years.
Yeah, I admit that when they came out with that matte finish to the car, what was it, last year, or has they gone with it for
the year before? Like it's even the year before, 2016.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool, but I think for me, just like yourself, I think that the time has come for a bit of a refresh. I mean, it's not horrible, but it's not really knocking my socks off compared to some of the other ones. I mean, like we were saying, when we look at the McLaren, I'm like, wow. When I look at the Red Bull, I'm like, yeah, that's okay.
Meh. Yeah, that's what I am. I am
exactly. Meh.
Another team that gives me meh, and it's too bad because I'm wearing their polo right now. It's Williams. The Williams looks good. Like the chassis itself, the lines of it looks good. It's just a shame that it's terrible. But the halo looks great on it, the way it's incorporated. And it's a little thinner at the bottom, a little thicker at the top. And there's like an aerodynamic component to it. So it does blend in more with the car than others. But we know the car is terrible, and that's a shame. But you do see a nice-looking Martini Williams, but it looks the exact same as the last 3 years. And maybe, like you mentioned, maybe it's time to make that straight line a bit zigzaggy or just change some element of design that would make at least the car stand out and not having to check at the metadata of the photo to know which year because it looks the same from 16, 17 to 18.
Yeah, the only way you can really tell between this year and last year is obviously the addition of the halo for 2018. But just to briefly go on a bit of a tangent, I mean, talk about a horrible weekend for them. I guess we've just strolled right past our usual segment, taking a stroll with Lance, which was a regular for our countrymen last year. But I mean, P14. I don't even recall seeing Lance during the broadcast, maybe more than once or twice. And
when Charles Leclerc overtook him. That's when I saw him, is when a Alfa Romeo Sauber overtook a Mercedes-powered Williams.
Yeah, and then just going back to that theme of weird things happening, his teammate, Sergei Sirotkin, had his race ended after his brake duct inhaled a plastic sandwich bag, which caused the entire brake system to overheat, and at one point he actually lost all the brakes. That is another weird thing.
$100 million car is broken by a 100-penny bag.
Yeah, exactly. There's like maybe like a quarter of a cent of plastic in the sandwich bag, and that's what brought this multi-million-dollar engineering wonder to a screeching halt. Literally, it absolutely boggles my mind.
Quickly finishing off here, the segment of fashion and the show for today. Renault, it's a bit of different type of yellow. It's the same yellow, but the pattern is a bit different. But it's the same idea. It's yellow on black. Renault colors of today. It looks all right, but nothing to call your mother about.
Yeah. Again, I mean, it's not horrible. It's kind of middle of the road for me. Again, yeah, it's not one of those ones that kind of makes me like, yeah, that's completely horrible. Middle of the road, not really knocking my socks off. I would give it a C plus. Give it a 6 out of 10 if we want to go on the number scale.
All right. Toro Rosso, a lot of change for Toro Rosso, but the Honda presence and the red line, I don't know. There's a lot more Red Bull than Toro Rosso in that. Not the color scheme, but just it says Red Bull everywhere on that car right now. There's not a lot of other sponsors on it. I don't think it looks that... It's a bit different in the way looking, like you can tell on the screen right here. It looks a bit different than others. It's a bit more streamlined. It has some different curves. It seems to handle pretty decently, but it's a meh car. There's nothing special, and there's not enough change or I don't know. There's like a lack of concept. There's just a lot of colors on the blue, and there's a lot of white on it, and there's a lot of lines, but there's nothing like that. There's a lack of maybe continuity or thought. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
The Haas look exactly the same, so there's no need to belabor the point. There's a bit more white, but it's exactly the same. Force India is the last one. Now, Mark, Force India looked, well, I have to say, I kind of like a bit less pink than last year. They've broken the pink a bit with a bit of white here and there, and it kind of makes for a faster looking car. I don't know. It's hard to tell why, but it makes for a crisper looking car with a bit less of pink.
Yeah, actually last year when they announced that they were going to that like that pink color after the last several years with like the predominantly the black with a bit of white in it, which I thought was a really nice paint scheme actually, but I thought it was a bold move. I thought that the pink when they went to it last year actually worked, but I really like the way that they've broken it up this year. Like you say, they've added quite a bit of white into it, and I think that the BWT, their main sponsor, I think that the blue for their branding, I think it all goes together quite nicely. I think it stands out nicely, and they've got a couple other different sponsors on there like Claro, NEC, and Hype. They're all black on there as well, and I think it looks really good. I think that all the colors go together nicely. I think all in all, it's a nice looking car, but unfortunately they kind of went backwards on the grid, at least during Melbourne, after they were, I'd say, the best of the rest last year, because there was obviously, we had Ferrari, Mercedes, then we had Red Bull, and then we had Force India and everyone else. So but at least they look good. We'll see if they can turn it around next week.
Yep, exactly. We'll be back next week with we'll see if we come back before Bahrain or review Bahrain. It's still up for debate. Mark and I will talk about it, but I'm excited to have this season start again. A lot of brand new hopes, energy. I was excited watching the race on Saturday morning, Saturday night. But yeah, I'm excited, Mark, and I'm looking forward for the rest of the season.
Me too. It was a great way for me to start off the year because, first of all, I was at BC Place in Vancouver to cover the Vancouver Whitecaps and the LA Galaxy. And, Kevin, I looked every inch of BC Place looking for Zlatan Ibrahimovic, and I can say for a fact that he was not in Vancouver. And if he was, they hit him very well. And I looked also for Chris Hemsworth, who was there. Didn't see him either, except on the big screen, but confirmed no Zlatan in Vancouver last Saturday night. But then after that, straight home to relax, watch the Grand Prix, and it was a great Saturday night, fun way to spend an evening of work and play. No,
exactly. And Mark, where can the listeners follow you on social media if they want to make sure they're always up to speed with your opinion on Formula One?
If they want to follow my personal account, that is at Mark J.R. Dailey, and that's with an EY at the end. That's my own personal thoughts and musings on Formula One. For the show Twitter account, that is the same name as this podcast, at Scuderia F1 Pod. And, of course, we also have a Facebook page of the very same name where we post occasionally and where you can find all the links to the live stream and the video stream.
Yep, and you can find the video edition of the show on the Sports Podcast Network's YouTube page, which is located at youtube.com/Sports Podcast Network, and as well on our Facebook page. After the fact, I will post the video of the show. You can listen to us when we do the show live or on demand on sportspodcastingnetwork.com or anywhere you get your podcast. That would be Apple Podcasts, Google Play Store, Stitcher, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio. Whenever you get your podcast, you can find the Scuderia F1 podcast under the Sports Podcast Network feed and on his own as well. Mark, thank you very much for your time tonight. It's always a pleasure, and I kind of missed you.
I missed you too, Kevin. It's been a long winter, but hey, we got 20 more Grand Prix to go this year, so we'll be talking a lot between now and then.
And as always, until next time, have a great Formula One.
Thanks for listening to the Scuderia F1 podcast. If you want to get the show notes for this episode, then head over to ScuderiaF1pod.com. Want to get in touch with us? Then email us at ScuderiaF1pod@gmail.com.